9 Golden Age stars who were shockingly smart. The dumbest-looking people in Hollywood were actually the smartest in the room, and the studios spent millions hiding that from you. The sex symbol they marketed as a beautiful airhead? She invented the technology your Wi-Fi uses while studio executives were still struggling with rotary phones. That stammering, aw-shucks everyman with the boyish face, Princeton-educated architect who commanded bombing runs over Nazi Germany when he wasn't busy fooling America into thinking he was just a simple farm boy, and the bombshell who supposedly couldn't read her lines. She spoke 3 languages and routinely redlined studio contracts until lawyers begged executives not to leave her alone with the paperwork. Hollywood's biggest lie wasn't on screen. It was pretending their stars were idiots, revealed a former MGM publicist who worked with dozens of Golden Age icons. We had literal geniuses on our lots, military strategists, inventors, business masterminds, and we were ordered to bury it all. Nobody wants to lust after a woman who could outthink them, my boss told me. Nobody wants heroes smarter than they are. The truth would have shattered the fantasy and tanked the box office. So the studios created an elaborate fiction, not just hiding these stars' intellects, but actively creating fake, dumb moments to reinforce the lie. We'd plant stories about actresses asking where Europe was or actors who couldn't read their scripts, admitted a former publicity director. Meanwhile, those same dumb blondes were reading physics textbooks in their dressing rooms, and those simple leading men were discussing architecture and military strategy between takes. This wasn't just casual deception. It was industrial-scale fraud that ruined careers, delayed scientific innovation, and robbed brilliant women of recognition that went instead to mediocre men. And nowhere was this cover-up more shocking than with our first star, a woman whose brain changed modern technology while Hollywood was selling her body.
Like that, no. But tell me more. I never lived that way.
Isn't that what it's all about?
No, not to me. I guess in the...
Hedy Lamarr, the beautiful idiot who outsmarted the Pentagon. Hedy Lamarr's face launched 1,000 magazine covers. Her body inspired Snow Whites. MGM marketed her as the most beautiful woman in the world, a gorgeous ornament with nothing going on upstairs. What studio executives hid from the public? She was a self-taught inventor who created military technology so revolutionary that when she tried to donate it to the Navy to fight Hitler, they literally laughed her out of the room. The admirals couldn't process that this glamorous actress with the heavy accent was handing them technology their own engineers couldn't develop, said a military historian. They didn't just reject it, they told her to stick to selling war bonds and looking pretty. Imagine telling Einstein to stick to violin because he looked good playing it. Born Hedwig Eva Maria Kiesler in Austria, Lamarr didn't stumble into inventing as a hobby. She had systematically studied engineering principles, often working late into the night on designs while the studio thought she was at parties or resting her pretty little head. Her home looked like a mad scientist's lab, revealed a friend who visited in the 1940s. Drafting tables instead of vanities, technical journals instead of fashion magazines. If Louis B. Mayer had seen how she actually spent her time, he'd have had a stroke right there on her doorstep. The problem Lamarr tackled wasn't just any technical challenge, it was one of the war's most critical issues. German forces could easily detect and jam signals to radio-controlled torpedoes, rendering them useless. With composer George Antheil, she invented frequency hopping, where the signal would jump across 88 different frequencies, making it impossible for enemies to jam the complete signal. It was decades ahead of its time. The concept was so advanced that engineers couldn't fully implement it with 1940s technology, explained a communications specialist. She basically invented modern, secure wireless communications before computers existed to take full advantage of it. The patent, filed under her married name Hedy Kiesler Markey, gathered dust until the 1960s. By the 1990s, when engineers finally recognized that Lamarr's frequency hopping concept had become the foundation for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, GPS, and military communications, she was an elderly recluse, bitter about how Hollywood had wasted her mind on pretty girl parts. The most devastating fact, in 1942 alone, the year after the Navy rejected Lamarr's invention, Allied forces lost 34 merchant ships specifically due to torpedo guidance failures of the exact kind her technology was designed to prevent. Over 1,000 sailors and merchant marines died because military brass couldn't believe a beautiful actress could solve their engineering problem. She wasn't just ahead of her time, She was punished for it, noted a naval historian. The military would rather lose ships than admit a Hollywood beauty queen had outsmarted their entire engineering department. When the Electronic Frontier Foundation finally honored her in 1997, just 3 years before her death, she didn't even attend in person. She was 83, nearly blind, and had given up expecting recognition. She accepted by saying simply, "It's about time." Every time you use your phone's Bluetooth or connect to Wi-Fi, said a technology historian, you're using technology that exists because a Hollywood sex symbol was secretly a genius, despite every effort by men to make sure you'd never know it.
He ran away and joined the circus when he was a senior in high school.
James Stewart, the combat commander who played dumb for America. The Jimmy Stewart that America fell in love with, the stammering, humble everyman from It's a Wonderful Life and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, was one of the most brilliant acting performances in history. Because the real James Stewart was a Princeton-educated architect with a genius-level understanding of engineering who became a decorated combat commander leading bombing raids over Nazi Germany. Stewart wasn't just in the military. He was a strategic mastermind who rose to brigadier general through sheer competence, explained a military historian. While other actors were posing for photo ops in uniform, Stewart was flying B-24 bombers through enemy fire, planning complex bombing campaigns, and writing technical manuals on aircraft operation that were used to train other pilots. Stewart's intelligence wasn't some hidden secret before fame. He graduated from Princeton with a degree in architecture and had been offered admission to graduate programs before choosing acting instead. Throughout his career, he routinely shocked directors with his detailed understanding of set construction and design principles. He once took one look at a blueprint for a set and identified 3 structural problems that would make filming impossible, recalled a set designer. The studio architect argued with him until they built it, and everything collapsed exactly where Stewart predicted it would. After that, they started running set designs by him before construction. But it was World War II that revealed the full extent of Stewart's capabilities. Unlike many stars who found safe positions or publicity assignments, Stewart insisted on combat duty. He wasn't just along for the ride, he was in command. He flew 20 bombing missions over Nazi Germany, emphasized a war historian. These weren't ceremonial flights. These were among the most dangerous combat operations of the war, with casualty rates that would terrify most people. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross, the French Croix de Guerre, and 7 battle stars through genuine heroism. What Hollywood actively covered up was the sheer scale of Stewart's military accomplishments. In 1959, he was quietly promoted to Brigadier General in the Air Force Reserve, the highest-ranking entertainer in American military history. When the Air Force tried to publicize this achievement, Stewart's agent blocked the announcement, fearing it would damage his average Joe image. The Pentagon had to receive Stewart's personal authorization before even mentioning his military career in their own internal publications. The studios were terrified that if Americans saw him as General Stewart instead of A.W. Shucks Jimmy, they'd stop relating to him as an everyman, said a publicity agent from the era. They had built a billion-dollar fantasy around his just plain folks persona, and his actual brilliance threatened to destroy it. Even Stewart's famous stutter and hesitant speech pattern, which seemed so natural on screen, was revealed to be a calculated performance technique when he discussed technical subjects in his real life. I once heard him explaining aeronautical principles to a group of actual engineers, remembered a crew member from The Spirit of St. Louis. The stammer completely vanished. He was articulate, precise, using technical terminology most people wouldn't understand. Then someone from the press walked in, and he immediately switched back to the aw shucks Jimmy Stewart everyone expected. Stewart maintained this careful separation between his public image and his actual intellectual capabilities throughout his career, a strategic choice that allowed him to connect with audiences in ways that a more obviously intelligent persona might not have. He was smart enough to know that appearing too smart would have limited his appeal, observed a director who worked with Stewart multiple times. That's a special kind of intelligence, understanding that sometimes the most powerful move is to hide your power.
A habitual tipper, I would listen and talk and listen and chat with people. And the first thing you know...
Marlon Brando, the troubled genius who was actually a calculating mastermind. Hollywood's favorite story about Marlon Brando paints him as a brilliant but unstable method actor, a tortured artist who struggled with his lines, relied on cue cards, and became increasingly difficult as his emotional problems overtook his talent. It's a compelling narrative. It's also complete fiction. The real Brando was a calculating intellectual with near photographic memory who deliberately cultivated an image of instability because it gave him unprecedented control over directors, studios, and his own career. The cue cards thing was mostly laziness, not inability, revealed a director who worked closely with Brando. I watched him memorize 5 pages of dialogue after reading them once. He had what amounted to a photographic memory when he chose to use it. He just often chose not to because the troubled genius act gave him power. Beneath the mumbling, animalistic screen persona that made him famous in films like A Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront was a man with extraordinary linguistic abilities. Brando was fluent in French, knowledgeable in Japanese, and could pick up dialects and accents with a speed that professional language coaches found astonishing. His ear was supernatural, remembered a dialect coach who worked with many major stars. Most actors need weeks of daily practice to master an accent. Brando could hear it once and reproduce it perfectly, not just the sounds but the musicality and rhythm. It was like watching a computer download a program. This facility with language extended to Brando's understanding of psychology and human behavior. He consumed books on psychology, anthropology, and sociology, applying these insights to create performances of unprecedented depth. I once walked in on him surrounded by anthropology textbooks and journals, recalled a crew member from the Missouri Breaks. He was studying Native American tribal structures to inform his character's relationship dynamics. When I asked what he was doing, he launched into this sophisticated analysis that sounded like a university lecture. This was the same guy the press called emotionally unstable. Most surprising was Brando's technical understanding of filmmaking itself. While many actors remain ignorant of camera technology and lighting techniques, Brando studied these aspects with the same intensity he brought to character development. He knew more about lenses than some cinematographers I've worked with, said a camera operator from Last Tango in Paris. He could tell you why a 50mm lens would create a different emotional effect than a 35mm. He understood how lighting ratios affected mood. This wasn't superficial knowledge. It was detailed, technical understanding. But perhaps Brando's most brilliant performance was in contract negotiations, where he consistently outmaneuvered studio executives to secure unprecedented deals. His arrangement for Superman, $3.7 million plus 11.75% of gross profits for less than 2 weeks of work, demonstrated a business acumen that shocked Hollywood and changed how top stars were compensated. Brando's most devious negotiation trick was exposed in 1976 when a studio executive accidentally left documents behind at a restaurant. They revealed Brando's method bargaining technique. Before major contract meetings, he would secretly research the financial details of competing studios, the personal financial problems of specific executives, and the exact budget constraints of the project. Then he would appear to negotiate irrationally, making wild demands and sudden concessions, while actually maneuvering executives precisely toward the maximum possible figure. One document specifically warned, never negotiate with Brando directly. His apparent emotional instability is an act designed to extract maximum financial concessions. Brando understood that being underestimated was a form of power, observed a director who worked with him multiple times. People came prepared for emotional outbursts and instead encountered a mind like a steel trap. It kept everyone off balance, exactly where he wanted them. By the time of his death, Brando's reputation for difficulty had largely overshadowed recognition of his intellectual capabilities. Yet those who worked closely with him insist that behind the mumbling method actor was one of the most sophisticated minds they'd ever encountered. He played broken men with broken minds, concluded a longtime friend. Meanwhile, his own mind was operating like a chess computer, seeing 15 moves ahead while everyone else was playing checkers.
I'm not going to sleep in the same room with her. See the way she looked at me?
Angela Lansbury, the sweet grandma who built a business empire. When you think of Angela Lansbury, you probably picture the kindly mystery writer Jessica Fletcher from Murder, She Wrote, or the voice of Mrs. Potts singing Beauty and the Beast. That gentle, grandmotherly image concealed one of the most ruthlessly effective business minds in Hollywood, a woman who outmaneuvered studio executives decades before female empowerment became marketable. Angela didn't just star in Murder, She Wrote, she owned a massive chunk of it, revealed a television executive, While actresses her age were taking whatever scraps Hollywood offered, she structured one of the most lucrative deals in television history. She wasn't just earning a salary, she was building generational wealth through ownership. Born to a politically prominent British family, her grandfather led the Labour Party, Lansbury received the kind of sophisticated education usually reserved for men in that era. She was fluent in French, trained in Shakespearean acting, and absorbed practical political strategy at the family dinner table before her family fled to America during World War II. This background gave her weapons few actresses possessed when navigating the sharky waters of Hollywood contracts. While her contemporaries focused on per-episode salaries, Lansbury understood the long-term value of ownership stakes and creative control. For Murder, She Wrote, Angela didn't just negotiate a good salary, she became an executive producer with profit participation, explained an entertainment attorney familiar with television deals of that era. This was the 1980s when networks were still telling women they should be grateful just to be on camera after 40. Meanwhile, she was quietly building an ownership position that would generate millions long after the show ended. The financial results were staggering. While CBS initially thought they were being generous offering Lansbury $50,000 per episode, compared to the typical $35,000 for female leads her age, her ownership stake and international rights deal ultimately generated an estimated $72 million over her lifetime. A 1996 network memo accidentally shared with her agent complained, "The Jessica Fletcher character generates more revenue than Mickey Mouse per hour of content, and we don't control the rights." When a junior executive suggested renegotiating, the response from senior management was blunt. Never enter a contract discussion with Lansbury without at least 2 attorneys present. She was earning more than almost any actress in Hollywood during the 80s and 90s, but you'd never know it from her public image, noted a television producer from that era. While other stars flaunted their wealth, Angela maintained this image of modest gentility. That was strategic. Studios couldn't use her wealth against her in negotiations if the public thought she was just a working actress. Lansbury's business acumen extended to careful brand management long before that term became common in Hollywood. She meticulously controlled which roles she accepted, balancing commercial projects with artistic ones that maintained her critical credentials. She'd do Murder, She Wrote for the money and security, then a Stephen Sondheim musical to feed her artistic soul, observed a theatrical director who worked with her several times. And she understood exactly how each choice affected her value in both markets. Nothing was accidental. What makes Lansbury's hidden intelligence particularly notable is how deliberately she concealed it beneath an accessible, grandmotherly persona. By appearing warm and unthreatening, she was able to negotiate from positions that might have been perceived as difficult or demanding from other actresses. She would come into negotiations so prepared, with such complete understanding of production costs, market projections, and syndication potential, that executives were often stunned, recalled a former CBS executive. But she presented everything with such charm that they couldn't dismiss her as difficult, even when she was effectively taking them to the cleaners. The greatest mystery Angela Lansbury ever solved wasn't on television. It was how to maintain complete control of her career, image, and finances in an industry designed to take that control away from women. And she did it so elegantly that most people never even realized what they were watching.
I'm your girl. You can lick me if it'll help.
Claudette Colbert, the woman who weaponized vanity. When Claudette Colbert demanded to be filmed only from her left side, Hollywood rolled its eyes at another difficult actress with petty concerns. They had no idea they were being played by a strategic mastermind who had found the perfect way to seize control of entire productions. Claudette's left side only demand wasn't about vanity, it was about power, explained a film historian specializing in women in early Hollywood. By creating this seemingly superficial requirement, she gained unprecedented control over lighting, camera placement, and set design. Directors couldn't just shoot however they wanted. They had to accommodate her quirk. And while they were focused on that, she was quietly accumulating control over everything from script revisions to shooting schedules. Born in France as Lily Claudette Chauchouin, Colbert was fluent in French, English, and later German, linguistic abilities that gave her significant advantages as Hollywood transitioned from silent films to talkies. While many actors struggled with dialogue, Colbert's sophisticated understanding of language allowed her to excel. This linguistic intelligence extended to contract negotiations, where Colbert's ability to parse complex legal language allowed her to identify and reject clauses that limited her autonomy. While many actresses signed whatever was put in front of them, Colbert scrutinized every detail with the precision of a contract lawyer. She once sent back a contract with more red ink than original text, recalled a studio lawyer from that era. What shocked us wasn't just that she'd read it closely, it was that she understood the implications of legal terminology specifically designed to confuse actors. She wasn't just smart, she was dangerously smart from the studio's perspective. Colbert's negotiations weren't just smart, they were brutal. In 1934, Paramount executives thought they'd outfoxed her by burying a clause allowing them to loan her to other studios at her base salary while pocketing the difference. When she discovered this during a routine review, her response became legendary. According to a memo preserved in Paramount's archives, she marched into the studio head's office and placed a single piece of paper on his desk with a note that read, "I've just purchased controlling interest in the following gossip magazines. I wonder how your wife would feel about the stories I could share about your Thursday afternoon visits to Burbank. Either tear up this contract by 5 p.m. or I tear up your marriage. Your choice." She walked out with a new contract and a 45% pay increase. Colbert's approach to her career revealed an understanding of industry economics that most actors never developed. She recognized early on that scarcity increased value, deliberately limiting the number of films she made each year and rejecting the standard studio practice of working actors to exhaustion. She negotiated a contract that specified she would work only from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., 5 days a week, when most actors were doing 14-hour days, 6 days a week, said an entertainment historian. Studios initially balked, but she held firm. She knew her worth and understood something fundamental about economic leverage that most actors never grasped. The only photograph me from the left side demand was brilliant misdirection, the kind of flourish a magician uses to draw your attention while the real trick happens elsewhere. Executives focused on this supposedly frivolous concern while she quietly negotiated creative control, profit participation, and working conditions that no other actress had. By the time they realized what had happened, the contracts were signed. She used the vain actress stereotype against them, observed a cinematographer who worked on several Colbert films. They were so busy rolling their eyes at her silly demand that they didn't notice she was rewriting all the rules of how actresses were treated and compensated. It was strategic genius disguised as female vanity. By the end of her career, Colbert had maintained complete control of her image, her finances, and her creative choices, a level of autonomy that few actresses of any era have achieved. What appeared to many as luck or good fortune was actually the result of extraordinary intelligence applied consistently over decades. Claudette didn't wait for Hollywood to give her power, concluded a biographer who extensively studied her career. She created systems and strategies that gave her power in an industry designed to keep it from women, and she did it while making them think she was just worried about looking pretty on camera.
No, I shouldn't do that if I were you, Colonel Kavanaugh.
I must congratulate you, Mr. Holmes. You're far more clever than I thought.
Basil Rathbone, the actor who actually was Sherlock Holmes. When Basil Rathbone played Sherlock Holmes in 14 films between 1939 and 1946, audiences assumed he was simply a talented actor bringing Arthur Conan Doyle's detective to life. What they didn't know was that Rathbone possessed intellectual capabilities that rivaled those of the fictional detective himself. Basil wasn't playing Sherlock Holmes. He was Sherlock Holmes with better social skills, declared a co-star who worked with Rathbone on several films. His powers of observation, his memory, his analytical abilities, they weren't acting. That was actually Basil. Born to British parents in South Africa and educated in England, Rathbone was fluent in multiple languages, including English, French, and German, with working knowledge of Italian and Spanish. This linguistic facility made him invaluable during World War I, where he served in military intelligence and received the Military Cross for bravery. He would go on night reconnaissance missions into no man's land, gathering intelligence on German positions, explained a military historian. His ability to speak German fluently, combined with his powers of observation, made him essentially a real-life spy. He could move through enemy territory, gather critical information, and return with details that saved countless lives. This wartime experience gave Rathbone a depth of understanding about human behavior under pressure that informed his performances. But it was his extraordinary memory that most impressed colleagues in Hollywood. Basil could memorize an entire Shakespeare play overnight, remembered a theatrical director who worked with Rathbone in the 1930s. Not just his own lines, everyone's lines, stage directions, everything. I once watched him fill in for an actor who fell ill, taking over the role with just hours of preparation. He didn't just know the lines, he had developed a complete character interpretation in that time. This memory extended beyond performance to a near encyclopedic knowledge of history, literature, and science. Directors noted that Rathbone would often identify historical inaccuracies in scripts or suggest more period-appropriate dialogue, all without reference materials. He once corrected an entire scene set in the 16th century France because the political alliances described were from the wrong decade, recalled a screenwriter who worked on a historical drama starring Rathbone. When we checked historical records, he was right. He hadn't just memorized dates. He understood the complex relationships between events. Perhaps most impressive were Rathbone's physical and mental capabilities that made him one of Hollywood's greatest swordsmen. His famous dueling scenes in films like The Adventures of Robin Hood and The Court Jester weren't just choreographed, they demonstrated a genuine mastery of fencing that began in his youth and continued throughout his life. What remained hidden until decades after his death was Rathbone's extraordinary military record. In 1918, wearing a specialized camouflage suit he designed himself, Rathbone led a daylight reconnaissance mission deep behind German lines. When discovered, he engaged and neutralized 3 enemy soldiers in silence using only his officer's sword, a feat so extraordinary that his commanding officer initially refused to include it in reports, believing it would damage the credibility of their intelligence. The incident was finally declassified in 1978, revealing that the mission provided critical intelligence that helped break the Hindenburg Line and contributed to ending the war. The producers cast him as Holmes because they needed someone who could credibly portray exceptional intelligence, said a film historian. What they got was someone who actually possessed that intelligence. When you watch those films now, you're not seeing an actor's interpretation of genius, you're seeing the real thing.
Your intolerance infuriates me. I should think that of all people, a writer would need tolerance.
Katharine Hepburn, the Bryn Mawr rebel who outplayed everyone. When RKO labeled Katharine Hepburn box office poison in 1938, they thought they were ending a troublesome actress's career. Instead, they just handed a chess master her opening move. Kate didn't just survive in Hollywood, she conquered it on her own terms, emphasized a film historian, and she did it through pure intellectual force, outthinking, outmaneuvering, and outlasting everyone who tried to control or dismiss her. Born to wealthy, progressive parents who encouraged education and independent thinking, Hepburn received the kind of intellectual foundation rarely available to women of her era. Her degree from Bryn Mawr College, one of America's most rigorous women's institutions, provided her with both academic knowledge and the confidence to deploy it in male-dominated environments. She approached Hollywood like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, observed a director who worked with Hepburn multiple times. She analyzed how the system worked, identified its weaknesses, and then developed strategies to exploit those weaknesses. She wasn't just participating in the industry, she was dissecting it. This analytical approach was most evident in Hepburn's response to being labeled box office poison. Rather than accepting Hollywood's verdict, she strategically purchased the rights to The Philadelphia Story, developed it as a Broadway hit, and then sold it to MGM with the non-negotiable condition that she would star in the film version. That wasn't luck or simple persistence. That was chess played at a grandmaster level, explained an entertainment attorney. She identified an asset that studios would want, controlled it completely, and then used it as leverage to resurrect her film career on her own terms. Few executives, let alone actors, would have had the strategic vision to execute such a plan. Hepburn's intellectual capabilities extended far beyond career management. Directors and writers noted her extraordinary ability to analyze scripts, identify structural weaknesses, and suggest improvements that strengthened entire projects. She didn't just look at her own role, she understood how every character and scene contributed to the whole, recalled a screenwriter who worked with Hepburn in the 1950s. She could identify a plot hole or character inconsistency that writers who had been working on the script for months had missed, and she was usually right. Perhaps most impressive was Hepburn's ability to maintain both artistic integrity and financial independence during the McCarthy era, when many performers found themselves forced to compromise their principles or lose their livelihoods. Hepburn's refusal to be intimidated was captured in a now legendary 1951 confrontation with a studio executive who warned her that refusing to sign a loyalty oath could end her career. According to witnesses, she fixed him with her famously intense stare and said, "I'm not afraid of your politics. I'm not afraid of your studio, and I'm certainly not afraid of you. Listen very carefully. I don't need to work, but you need me to work for you. I own my house outright. I have investments that would sustain 3 women for their lifetimes. I can disappear tomorrow and live beautifully for the rest of my life. Can you say the same? Now, would you like to discuss actual business? Or shall I pack up and take my economic independence elsewhere?" While others were signing loyalty oaths or naming names, Kate was quietly ensuring her financial security through careful investment and living below her means, noted a financial advisor who worked with several Hollywood stars of that era. She understood that economic independence was the foundation of artistic and political freedom. She was never vulnerable to pressure because she never needed anyone's permission to survive. By the end of her unprecedented 60-year career, Hepburn had accumulated 4 Academy Awards and a level of autonomy that few performers of any gender have ever achieved. What appeared to many as simple strength of personality was actually the result of extraordinary intelligence applied consistently across decades. They called her difficult because she was smarter than most of the men she dealt with, concluded a biographer who extensively researched Hepburn's life. The tragedy is that Hollywood forced her to use so much of that brilliance just fighting for the basic respect and control that should have been hers by right.
Nonsense. Why, how you are blossoming.
Peter Ustinov, the man who made Mensa look lazy. If Peter Ustinov had never appeared in a single film, he would still have been considered one of the most intellectually accomplished figures of his generation. That he also won 2 Academy Awards seems almost incidental to a mind that operated comfortably across an astonishing range of disciplines. Peter wasn't really an actor who did other things, observed a colleague who worked with him in multiple capacities. He was an intellectual who sometimes acted, along with writing novels, directing operas, composing music, crafting sculptures, and speaking 6 languages fluently. Acting was just one manifestation of a mind that couldn't be contained by any single discipline. Born in London to a Russian father and a French-Russian mother whose family included both Ethiopian nobility and Russian aristocracy, Ustinov grew up in a multilingual household where intellectual achievement was considered the baseline expectation. By the time he was a teenager, he was already fluent in English, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish, noted a linguistic scholar who studied Ustinov's facility with languages. And this wasn't just functional communication. He could write poetry, deliver complex speeches, and create humor in all these languages. He understood the cultural nuances, historical contexts, and literary traditions of each. This extraordinary linguistic ability made Ustinov one of the world's most sought-after public speakers, able to address international bodies like the United Nations without translation and switch between languages mid-speech for emphasis or clarity. While many actors dabbled in writing, Ustinov was a serious novelist, playwright, screenwriter, and journalist, whose work was respected by literary critics independently of his fame as a performer. His novels explored complex historical and philosophical themes, while his plays were produced on major stages worldwide. He wrote with the depth and precision of someone who had dedicated their entire life to writing, said a publisher who worked with Ustinov on several books. You would never guess these works came from someone who was simultaneously maintaining an active career in film and theater. One lifetime shouldn't have been enough to develop such mastery across so many disciplines. Ustinov's intellectual breadth extended to music, where he composed scores, librettos, and even conducted major orchestras. His understanding of musical theory and history allowed him to discuss composition with leading musicians in technical terms that reflected deep knowledge rather than casual interest. He could analyze a Bach cantata in the morning, discuss Renaissance painting techniques in the afternoon, and then spend the evening debating modern political theory, remembered a friend who knew Ustinov for decades. And he brought the same level of expertise to each subject. It wasn't dilettantism. It was genuine mastery across an impossible range of fields. What made Ustinov's intellect particularly remarkable was how he deployed it without pretension or condescension. Unlike some intellectuals who use knowledge to establish superiority, Ustinov used his to connect with people across cultural and educational divides. Most actors who win Academy Awards focus intensely on perfecting their craft, observed a film critic who knew Ustinov personally. Peter won 2 Oscars almost as an afterthought, while simultaneously writing novels, composing music, and serving as a rector of a Scottish university. Acting was just one room in a vast intellectual mansion.
Leave much when you miss, do you, fat man? That's what the game's all about.
Paul Newman, the gorgeous face, hiding a business genius. When Paul Newman decided to sell his homemade salad dressing as a Christmas joke in 1982, few could have predicted it would become a billion-dollar food empire that would revolutionize corporate philanthropy. But that's exactly what happened, and it wasn't a fortunate accident, but the result of extraordinary business intelligence that most fans never suspected existed behind those famous blue eyes. Paul wasn't just a good-looking actor who got lucky in the food business, emphasized a former executive who worked with Newman on his food company. He was a legitimately brilliant businessman who approached product development, marketing, and corporate structure with the same intellectual rigor he brought to his acting roles. Born to a successful sporting goods store owner, Newman grew up absorbing business principles that he would later apply with remarkable effectiveness. After serving in the Navy during World War II, he completed a degree in economics from Kenyon College before pursuing acting, educational background that provided a foundation for his later business ventures. He understood supply chains, profit margins, and market positioning as well as any MBA, noted a business partner who worked with Newman on several ventures. The difference was that Paul viewed these concepts as tools for creating social impact rather than personal wealth. He wasn't just a good person who donated money, he completely reimagined how business could serve humanitarian purposes. Newman's approach to his food company, Newman's Own, revealed sophisticated strategic thinking that went far beyond celebrity endorsement. He established a fundamental principle that 100% of after-tax profits would go to charitable causes, creating not just a marketing hook, but an entirely new business model that challenged conventional corporate thinking. What Paul created wasn't just a successful company, it was a proof of concept that changed how people thought about the relationship between business and philanthropy, explained a professor of business ethics who has studied the Newman's Own model. He demonstrated that profit and purpose weren't opposing forces, but could actually reinforce each other if structured properly. This intellectual innovation extended to how Newman approached product quality and marketing. Rather than relying on his celebrity to sell inferior products, he insisted on premium ingredients and rigorous quality control, correctly anticipating that the combination of excellence and ethics would create a sustainable competitive advantage. He told us, "My face gets them to try it once, the quality gets them to buy it again," recalled a product developer who worked on early Newman's Own offerings. That insight, that celebrity could create initial interest, but only quality would build loyalty, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of consumer psychology that many dedicated marketing executives never grasp. Newman's intellect was equally evident in his approach to acting. Directors noted that while many actors focused solely on emotional preparation, Newman would extensively research historical contexts, technical details relevant to his characters, and psychological principles that informed behavior. He wasn't just playing a pool hustler in The Hustler. He made himself into a legitimate pool player who could execute difficult shots without camera tricks, said a director who worked with Newman in the 1960s. For winning, he became a genuinely skilled race car driver, eventually competing professionally at Le Mans. That wasn't vanity. It was intellectual commitment to authentic representation. By the end of his life, Newman had created a food empire that had donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charitable causes, established a network of camps for seriously ill children, and pioneered a business model that continues to influence corporate philanthropy worldwide. What appeared to many as simple generosity was actually the result of sophisticated strategic thinking about how to restructure the relationship between commerce and social responsibility. Paul wasn't just a good-hearted actor who gave away money, concluded a business partner who worked closely with Newman for decades. He was an innovative strategic thinker who created systems that generated both economic and social value simultaneously. The fact that he did all this while maintaining a successful acting career and a reputation for humility makes it even more remarkable.